My friends, the biggest story surrounding the Pittsburgh Steelers right now is not just about new faces on the roster or off-season workouts. It is about the clear direction this organization appears to be taking under its new coaching staff. And after listening carefully to the conversations coming from inside the building, one thing becomes obvious. There is a completely different approach being established, especially on the offensive side of the football, and that could end up shaping the future of this franchise for years to come. One of the strongest impressions coming from those who have been around the team throughout the offseason is that Mike McCarthy has wasted absolutely no time establishing his own identity. According to Christopher Carter, who has spent significant time covering the Steelers and interacting with the coaching staff during OTAs, there is already a noticeable difference in the atmosphere compared to previous years. Rather than simply allowing each position coach to handle their own responsibilities independently, McCarthy has become heavily involved in the offensive operation, especially when it comes to quarterback development. That is one of the biggest themes emerging from the offseason. Every opportunity to teach, every rep, every correction appears to matter. Even during periods where coaches are limited by off-season rules, the Steelers have found ways to maximize every minute available on the practice field. The coaching staff has adjusted how practices are organized, allowing players to spend as much productive time as possible working through details before formal coaching periods even begin. It may sound like a small adjustment, but inside an NFL building, those little details often separate good teams from great ones. What has drawn perhaps the most attention is just how many experienced offensive minds are focused on the quarterback room. It is not simply the quarterback's coach working with the young passers. Mike McCarthy himself is consistently involved during quarterback drills, offering corrections after nearly every drop back. Offensive coordinator Brian Angelicchio is also closely involved, while senior offensive assistant Frank Cignetti Jr., who has coached numerous NFL quarterbacks throughout his career, provides another experienced voice inside the room. Instead of relying on one coach to oversee quarterback development, the Steelers appear to have created an environment where multiple experienced coaches are contributing to every aspect of the learning process. That could become especially important considering the long-term questions surrounding the quarterback position. The discussion during the interview eventually shifted toward the future, and while Aaron Rodgers remains the experienced veteran in the room, there is obvious curiosity about what comes next. Young quarterbacks like Will Heyward and Drew Allar are receiving tremendous attention from the coaching staff, and that does not appear to be accidental. According to Christopher Carter, the amount of coaching being invested into these young quarterbacks stands out immediately when watching practice. Every footwork adjustment, every progression, every decision seems to receive immediate feedback. The organization clearly wants these young players absorbing as much knowledge as possible while learning behind a veteran. That philosophy could become incredibly valuable once training camp begins, where every practice rep will become even more competitive. But the offensive side is only part of the story. On defense, another fascinating transition is quietly taking shape under Patrick Graham. Steelers fans have grown accustomed to seeing certain defensive principles over the years, especially under Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin. However, Patrick Graham is not arriving with the intention of completely tearing everything down. Instead, his philosophy appears to center around preserving what has consistently worked throughout Steelers history, while incorporating concepts that have become increasingly successful across today's NFL. One area receiving particular attention is the increased use of split safety looks. Rather than relying primarily on a single deep safety, as the Steelers often did in previous seasons, Patrick Graham has openly acknowledged that many of the league's most successful defenses now utilize two high safety structures much more frequently. Christopher Carter explained that Graham himself referenced this league-wide trend, pointing towards successful defensive systems that have embraced split safeties while still maintaining physicality against the run. The interesting part is that this is not viewed as a complete overhaul of the Steelers' defensive identity. Instead, it appears to be an evolution. Graham has reportedly emphasized that there are many long-standing principles within Pittsburgh's defensive tradition that should remain untouched. The objective is not to erase decades of successful football. It is to modernize the system while keeping the core philosophy intact. That balance between tradition and innovation could become one of the defining stories of the upcoming season. But if this defensive vision is going to work, several young players may end up carrying enormous responsibility, and that opens up one of the biggest questions facing this roster moving forward. What do you think, Steelers Nation? Do you believe this new coaching approach can unlock the full potential of both the offense and the defense? Or do you think the biggest challenges are still ahead? The reason those young players become so important is because Patrick Graham's preferred Heyward defensive structure depends on winning at the line of scrimmage before anything else can happen. Throughout the discussion, Christopher Carter repeatedly came back to one central point. If the defensive front cannot consistently control the run with 4 players, the entire structure becomes much more difficult to execute. That immediately puts the spotlight on names like Derek Harmon and Keeanu Benton. According to Carter, Cameron Heyward has already proven throughout his career that he can dominate interior gaps, but the Steelers cannot rely on one veteran forever. They need the next generation of defensive linemen to take another step, and both Harmon and Benton are expected to play enormous roles in determining whether this defense reaches another level. One addition that also received considerable praise was Sebastian Joseph Day. Rather than viewing him as simply another depth piece, the conversation suggested that his presence could allow the Steelers to better rotate their defensive line while putting players in positions that maximize their strengths. Keeanu Benton in particular became the focus of an interesting discussion. Both Carter and the interviewer agreed that Benton appears far more effective when attacking gaps rather than serving as a traditional nose tackle responsible for absorbing double teams throughout an entire game. His quick hands, explosive first step, and ability to penetrate into the backfield have always stood out dating back to college, making him a dangerous interior disruptor instead of simply an anchor in the middle. If the Steelers can consistently use Benton in situations that emphasize those strengths, his production as a pass rusher could increase significantly. However, Carter also pointed out that the coaching staff has not necessarily indicated they are completely moving Benton away from the nose tackle responsibilities. During conversations with coaches throughout the offseason, there were still signs that the organization continues to view him as someone capable of handling those duties at times. That creates another fascinating storyline heading into training camp. Could Sebastian Joseph Day ultimately assume more of those traditional run-stuffing responsibilities? Could another young player emerge to compete for that role? Carter mentioned that the Steelers have several options fighting for playing time, including Yahya Black, Gabriel Rubio, Dean Lowry, Logan Lee, Isaiah Loudermilk, and Asezio Tomewo, creating what could become one of the more competitive battles on the defensive side of the roster. Regardless of how those rotations eventually unfold, Patrick Graham's priorities appear very clear. Stopping the run on early downs remains the foundation. That philosophy has been a trademark of Steelers football for decades, and despite introducing more modern coverage concepts, Graham has made it clear he has no interest in abandoning what has consistently worked for this organization. If the defense forces offenses into 3rd and long situations, that is where everything else begins to open up, and that leads directly into another area that generated plenty of excitement during the conversation. Unlike simply sending extra rushers on obvious passing downs, Patrick Graham has developed a reputation throughout his coaching career for creating pressure through disguise, movement, and simulated pressures rather than relying exclusively on heavy blitz packages. That distinction matters. Instead of constantly sacrificing defenders in coverage, simulated pressures create confusion for opposing quarterbacks while still allowing 7 defenders to remain in coverage after the snap. Looking at Pittsburgh's current personnel, there may be few defenses better equipped to execute that philosophy. TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith remain among the NFL's premier edge defenders, but they are far from the only players capable of affecting the quarterback. Patrick Queen has shown throughout his career that he can be an effective blitzer. Peyton Wilson possesses outstanding athletic ability that allows him to attack from multiple angles. Jalen Ramsey has also developed a reputation as one of the league's smartest and most versatile defensive backs, making him another potential weapon when Graham decides to bring pressure from unexpected places. The beauty of this system is that offenses may struggle to identify where pressure is actually coming from. One snap could feature Watt rushing while Highsmith drops into coverage. The next snap could see Ramsey attacking off the edge while Queen or Wilson fills another assignment. Everything is designed to force hesitation. For a quarterback, even a split second of uncertainty can completely change a play. Another player expected to benefit from this defensive evolution is Jalen Ramsey himself. Rather than asking him to remain locked into one traditional position, the coaching staff appears ready to move him throughout the formation depending on the situation. During the discussion, comparisons were even made to the role Charles Woodson played later in his career with Green Bay. Instead of functioning solely as an outside cornerback, Ramsey could line up in the slot, rotate towards safety, defend the run near the line of scrimmage, or even serve as a hybrid defender in passing situations. That type of versatility could become one of the defining characteristics of Patrick Graham's defense. The Steelers are not simply looking to to collect talented players. They appeared to be building a defense where each player's versatility creates uncertainty for opposing offenses before the ball is even snapped. And perhaps no position group may benefit more from this new defensive philosophy than the linebackers. Throughout the interview, Christopher Carter explained that communication became a major point of emphasis after Patrick Queen openly admitted that some of last season's defensive issues were not solely about scheme, but also about communication between players and coaches. Queen acknowledged that there were moments when he recognized adjustments needed to be made, but failed to clearly communicate those concerns, something that Mike Tomlin addressed by bringing everyone together to improve the process. Now, under Patrick Graham, the objective is to establish one unified defensive language across the entire unit, eliminating confusion and allowing every player to communicate faster and more effectively. If that improvement truly materializes, it could unlock the full potential of players like Patrick Queen and Peyton Wilson, giving the Steelers one of their most coordinated defensive units in years. You also have to appreciate how deliberate this entire process appears to be. Nothing that has been discussed throughout the offseason sounds rushed. Instead, every decision seems connected to a much larger vision for where the Steelers want to go over the next several years. Whether it is the increased attention being given to quarterback development, the emphasis on communication across the defense, or the willingness to modernize certain aspects of the scheme without abandoning the physical identity that has defined Pittsburgh football for decades, there is a sense that this organization is trying to build a sustainable foundation rather than searching for a quick fix. That is why training camp will become such a critical stage for this team. OTAs and minicamp can provide valuable insights, but once the pads come on, every discussion from the offseason will begin facing its first real test. Can the young defensive linemen consistently hold their ground against the run? Can Patrick Graham successfully implement the versatility and disguise that have become trademarks of his defensive philosophy? Will the communication improvements that players have talked about actually translate into cleaner execution on Sundays? Those questions remain unanswered, but they are exactly what will make this summer so fascinating to follow. The same can be said for the quarterback room. While the veteran presence naturally commands attention, the amount of coaching being invested in the younger quarterbacks suggests the Steelers are thinking